We're up to Kuf Yud Ches Amid Beis, 7 lines from the bottom, Amar Rav.
Don't leave any meat on your steak.
Yeah. The one thing what we're focusing on today is the halachas of a yad and a shomer. A yad means that it's connected to the food and it's used in order to help pick up the food and eat the food, and the shomer is to protect it. Now, the fact that there are differences in halacha, that a shomer is mitzdarif, a yad is not mitzdarif, let's just not focus on that. Let's just focus on a yad and a shomer. Now, the major halacha is that if something is tameh, and if you touch the yad, you're tameh. Meaning, if I have, let's say, the yad of an apple is the stem. So if the apple is tameh and I touch the stem, I'm tameh. Even though I didn't touch the apple, because the yad is significant. Shomer as well. If I touch the shell, I'm tameh. Yad and shomer. Fine. Says the Gemara Amar Rav, Ein yad lepachas mikazayis. In order for it to have the significance of a yad, the food has to be a kazayis. Meaning, if you have an apple that's less than a kazayis, the fact that there's a yad is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Now, by the way, the Mefarshim will deal with the fact that I thought this shear for food to transmit tumah was a kabeya. So what's the kazayis? So I'm going to go with the Rambam sheet. There's a whole arichos with Rashi and Tosfos. I'm going to go with Rambam. The Rambam says to transmit tumah, it needs to be a kabeya, but it could be makabel tumah, even a mashu. So you could have a tameh apple less than a kabeya because it receives tumah. So you have an apple that's less than a kazayis. The fact that it has a yad there's no such thing as a yad less than a kazayis. No such thing. Okay. That's the Rambam. Rashi is a whole more complex approach because he believes that everything is a kabeya, so it has to be that there's multiple foods in one vessel and they're mitzdarif together. But just go with the Rambam. It could be mekabel tumah less than a kabeya. It just can't transmit tumah on less than a kabeya. But it can be mekabel tumah less than a kabeya. So it's mekabel tumah, but it doesn't have a yad. There's no such thing as a yad less than a kazayis. So yad, kazayis. Shomer. What about the significance of a shomer? Which is again that if you touch the shell, that it has the significance in halacha. Ein shomer pachas mikful. It has to be the size of a bean. So for a yad to be significant, it has to be a kazayis. For a shomer to be significant, the food has to be a bean. So we're talking about the size of the food that is connected to a yad or a shomer. So for a yad, you need a kazayis. For a shomer, you need a bean. Okay, sure. That's Rav. Comes Rav Yechanan, he says, no, I disagree. Rav Yechanan, yesh yad lepachas mikazayis, yesh shomer lepachas mikful. Says Rav Yochanan, I disagree. You could have a yad less than a kazayis, you could have a shomer less than a bean. So you don't need those shiurim. So this machlokes is what we're doing today. This is what we're doing today. That's it. Not too bad. Rav believes that in order for it to be a yad, are you getting ksafta? Yeah, okay. Rav holds that in order for it to be a kazayis, in order for it to be a yad, you need a kazayis, and a shomer needs to be the size of a bean, and Rav Yechanan says it could be less. That's it. And now we're just going to bring rayas to Rav, rayas to Rav Yechanan. Now the next Gemara I find to be very strange. The next Gemara has machlokes tanoim, mamash about the shaila. And it's like, how does Rav explain both opinions? And the Gemara's like, well, Rav's like one. And how does Rav Yochanan explain both opinions? Rav Yochanan's like the other. It's just a weird thing that the Gemara doesn't just be like, this machlokes is the same machlokes as Tanoim. For some reason, it brings the machlokes Tanoim and says, explain both opinions. And Rav's like, well, I can't. I'm like one. Rav Yochanan, you explain both opinions. I can't. I'm like one. And it's just, I don't know why the syntax is a little bit strange. But anyway. Meisvei Vakasha, again, you have a machlokes for the shear of yad and a machlokes for the shear of shomer. Again, the size of the food that has a yad, the size of the food that can have a shomer. So Meisvei Vakasha, now this is regarding the laws of tumas oil. Now we know that if there's a piece of a dead body the size of a kazayis under a roof, the entire room is tameh. Let's say you have the following situation. I'll just say it outside. You have two bones, each one with a half a kazayis on each, under one roof, but the meat is not under the roof. The flesh is not under the roof. The bones are. The meat are outside, but the bones are inside. The halacha is it's tameh. Why? Because each half kazayis is mitzdarif together, and you'll say, okay, so you have a full kazayis because we combined the two fleshes. But you say to yourself, but the roof is not over the flesh, it's over the bone. The answer is, the bone is either a yad or a shomer. We'll have to figure out in a moment. So you see that there could be a yad or a shomer on less than a kazayis. So it's a good question. What is a bone? So it depends. A bone could be both. A bone could be the yad because you pick it up to eat the meat. But if the bone has marrow in it, then the bone is actually the shomer of the marrow. So bone can go either way. Whenever you're dealing with bones in Gemara, it's pick your adventure. It could be a shomer, it could be a yad. And that's hence the direction we're going to go. So it says the Gemara Meis, you have two bones from a dead body. And each bone has a half a kazayis, and each part of the bone, not the flesh, but the part of the bone is under the roof. Habayis malalein, habayis tameh. The Tanakama's opinion is the house is tameh. Why? Because it's above the bone, and the bone transmits tumah. Now, the bone could either be a yad or a shomer, depending on what type of bone it is. The Gemara, it's ambiguous. Okay, so you have a situation, according to the Tanakama, it's less than a kazayis, and you have either a yad or a shomer. Okay, comes Yehuda ben Nekusa, Omer Mishum Rav Yaakov. He quotes Rav Yaakov, and he says, "Hey, shnei samais mitzdarf from the kazayis. How could the two half a kazayis mitzdarf? It's too little. You need a kazayis. It's half than a kazayis, no good." Now, let's just talk this out for a second. If this bone is a yad, so that means Yehuda ben Akisa feels it has to be a kazayis. The Chum say it could be less than a kazayis. In which case, Rav, who says it has to be a kazayis, is Yehuda ben Akisa. Rav Yochanan, who says it could be less than a kazayis, is the Chachamim. If the Bryce is talking about a yad, it's mamish the same machlokes. If it's talking about a shomer, a little bit more tricky. So it says the Gemara, what type of bone are we talking about? Ibi yad. Rav, how does Rav explain this? Because again, Rav holds that it has to be a kazayis, and for a shomer it has to be a bean. So how does he interpret this brisa? Ibi yad, if it's talking about a yad, then the problem is kasha resha. Then Rav is no longer like the chachamim. He's like Yehuda ben Akisa, straight up, that less than a kazayis is no good. But how does he shtim with the rabbanon? And the Gemara is going to respond in a second. He doesn't. It's a machlekes tanoim. The Gemara says, and ibi shomer, and if the bone we're talking about is a shomer, kasha seifa. If it's a shomer, then a shomer could be the size of a bean. It doesn't have to be a kazayis. So what's Yehuda ben Nakisa's problem? That he says, it's less than a kazayis. Shomerim, we don't care about kazayis, we care about beans, the size of a bean. So are we talking about a yad or a shomer? And if we are, how does Rav explain both opinions? How could his opinion work with both? So the Gemara answers, it can't. The Gemara says, the truth is it could work either way. We could be talking about a yad. So Rav says a yad has to be a kazayis, and that's Yehuda ben Nakisa's opinion. How does he shtim with the chachamim? He doesn't. He follows Yehuda ben Nakisa. Ibi yad, Huda Amar ki Yehuda ben Nakisa. Iba yisema b'shomer, or the Bryce is talking about a shomer, and Huda Amar ki Tanakama. Well, if it's talking about a shomer, then it's not related to Rav at all, right? If it's talking about a shomer, then he could work even the chachamim less than a kazayis, because by a shomer it's the size of a bean. Then he could work with the chacham. So if it's yad or shomer, he's not going to be able to work with everybody, but he could work with somebody. What about Rav Yochanan? He says kula biyad, v'udam Tanakama, and Rav Yochanan follows the Tanakama. If Rav follows Yehuda ben Akisa, Rav Yochanan follows the Tanakama. In other words, this machlekes tanoim is the same machlekes as Rav and Rav Yochanan. Okay. Tashema, another one. Tashema, Rav Yehuda Omer kulis. If you have a thigh bone that has a kazayis of basar on it, gareris kula tumah, the entire thigh bone is now able to transmit tumah because it's a kazayis basar. Okay, so you need a kazayis, and then the thigh bone can transmit tumah. Now, by the way, the thigh bone, let's assume that bones can go either way. Could be a yad, could be a shomer. Fine. The acherim say no, it could even be a bean. It doesn't have to be a kazayis. It can be a bean of meat, and the bone will now transmit tumah. Now that kind of sounds like shomer. So let's figure it out. The Gemara says, Rav haibim mukula. What is this bone? Is this bone a yad or is this bone a shomer? Is this marrow and it's a shomer, or is it just a regular bone and it's a yad? Now, if it's a yad, kasha seifa. How does Rav follow the acherim? Because the acherim say the shear is a bean. Rav says it's a kazayis, and iba shomer kasha resha. And if it's a shomer, then why does the chacham say a kazayis? I mean, the chacham say kazayis, acherim say bean. What's going on over here? If it's a yad, how does Rav shtim with the acherim? And if it's a shomer, how does he shtim with the chachamim? So the Gemara is going to answer the same. It's the same answer. Rav doesn't work with everybody. He follows one opinion. Says the Gemara, Ibay Sema Yad, Hudama Rav Yehuda. It could be that we're talking about a yad, and he follows Rav Yehuda's opinion, the Tanakama, which is that it has to be a kazayis, and that's Rav's opinion. Or Ibay Sema Shomer Kacherim, or it's shomer and he follows the acherim. Meaning it works out well. If you just do the charts, it works out well. Rav Yochanan says, Kula b'shomer v'udam kacherim. Rav Yochanan, who says that everything could be less than a kazayis and less than a bean, he says the case is shomer and he follows the acherim. Now there's one problem with this. The problem is Rav Yochanan's opinion is less than a bean. The acherim say bean. So that's a little bit off. So it says the Gemara, acherim ha'kapul amri. I did kamer tanakama shiura kamer yininami shura. The answer is when the acherim say bean, it's lav dafka. It's really less than a bean. He said a bean because the Tanakama said kazai, so he picked bean. The truth is it's pachas bean as well. Okay. Amar Rava. Rava says dekanami. I'll prove it to you. The shomer askinan that we're talking about a bone that's a shomer. Diktani kulis, which is a thigh bone, which generally contains marrow. Shmamina. Okay. Now we said before that when the Rabbana, the acherim say bean, according to Rav Yochanan, it's lav dafka. It's really pachas mikabin. Or the simple way of reading the acherim is bean, and it's not like Rav Yochanan. Right? Rav Yochanan said that a shomer could be less than a bean. The acherim said it's a shomer, but it's a bean. So Rav Yochanan says, okay, lav dafka. The Gemara says it's a machlekes amiroim whether it's dafka. This shaila of whether the acherim were literal a bean or even less than a bean to have the significance of a shomer on top of it. Itmar Rav Chanina Amar Zeu Shir, Rav Yochanan Amar Ein Zeu Shir. Rav Chanina says no, a bean is the bean. That's when he said bean, he meant that it has to be the size of a bean, not less than a bean. Rav Yochanan says no, Ein Zeu Shir, even less than a bean. Okay. Ein Zashir, Hakatani Kapu. What do you mean Ein Zashir? He said a bean. I did Tanakama Shir, Tanakama Shir. The Tanakama gave a hard and fast shear, so he decided to pick a bean, but less than a bean is the same halach. One more shaila. Again, we're trying to figure out whether, again, according to Rav, for it to be a yad, you have to be a kazayas. For it to be a shomer, it has to be a bean. One more raya. Tashma, Rav Elazar ben Azariah, metar b'shel pul, u'metama b'shel kitnius. What this means is like this. You have a pod that has beans in it. Now the pod is not edible. Says the Gemara, if there's one bean in the pod, Rav Elazar says it's tahar. Why? Because the bean, why would the pod be able to transmit tama? Either a yad or a shomer, whatever it is. But I don't care. Beans, I don't need the pod. Even if I don't have the pod, I can still eat it. It doesn't protect it. It doesn't really do much. But kitnius, kitnius, which are small beans, legumes, that I need the pod to protect it. Okay, so you have you have one little legume inside the pod, inside the protector. So you have a pod that has like those pods you open up, it's got a lot of beans in there. You empty out all the beans, obviously the pod is meaningless. Says Rav Elazar, even if there's one bean in there, the pod, I don't need the pod. I don't care. I don't need the protection. Because even if it falls on the ground, I'll just rinse it off. But if it's a kidney, it's a small bean, I need the protection, and therefore the pod is now serving as a shomer and it's matama. Okay, that itself, by the way, is also an interesting point. You see that the shomer is based on subjective of whether you need it or not. Okay, correct. Yeah. Well, we're talking about the pod. Pashas, the pod is serving as a shomer, and it's basically telling you it depends on whether you need it. Okay. Let's go with it. It's a small bean. It's in the pod. I need it for protection. So now the pod protects it. Now, what did Rav say? Rav said that to be a shomer, it has to be the size of a bean. This is less than that, and yet it's serving as a shomer. Rav Yochanan says afilu pachas mebin. Rav says no, it has to be a large bean. This is talking about a small bean, not a large bean, a small bean, and it's serving as a shomer. So you see that it's serving as a shomer even on a small bean. So the Gemara says, no. The answer is, the Gemara answers that no. The case is, we're not talking about a shomer at all. The stem could be, the pod can be one of two, it could be used in one of two ways. It could be the shomer or it could be a yad. So the answer is we're not talking about a shomer, we're talking about a yad. Now why does that make it better? I guess, and the case is where there's enough small beans comprised together that the yad, meaning it's not a shomer protecting one bean, it's really a yad, because I pick it up and I eat the beans that way, and I guess there are enough small beans in there that it actually comprises of a kazayis. That's what you have to say. That's what you'll have to interpret the case. Okay. Now, what does it mean? It means that you're not using the shell, the pod, to protect. You're using it to tashmishan, to eat off of as a yad. Okay, one more shaila. According to Rav, for it to be a shomer, it has to be the size of a bean. Here's the problem. This is like a knockout shaila, pashtus. What's the source that a shomer is a thing? So we had it 2 days ago. The pasuk says that when you plant seeds, al kol zera zeru asher yizareya. The way you plant it is you plant it in its shell. So the Torah is giving significance to the shell. What are we talking about? We're talking about wheat seeds, barley seeds. They're very tiny. And you're seeing this as significance of a shell, of a shomer, even on a tiny amount. Says the Gemara, Tashema, the Tanit B'Rav Yishmael, Al Kol Zera Zerusha Yizareya. The pasuk says that when you plant seeds and it has a chashivas to a shomer, Keder Shemnei Adam Moitziin. Chita B'Kli Pasai, an example the Brisa gives of a shomer is a wheat kernel in its husk. Sa'ira B'Kli Pasai, a single barley bean in its husk. Adashim B'Kli Pasai, a single lentil in its husk. These are tiny. These are not the size of a bean. These are much smaller. So you see that a shomer could be on a much smaller thing. So how could Rav say that it has to be the size of a bean? It could be much smaller than that. So says the Gemara, Ber Yashani. That's the way God made it. In other words, if it's an entire item the way Hashem made it, it could be a shomer even much smaller. When Rav says it has to be a bean, he's talking about it's not the way Hashem made it. What is an example? You have a shomer, a bone that has marrow in it, a piece of flesh, whatever it is. The hide outside of flesh, that's a shomer, right? The skin is the shomer. How much flesh does there have to be to give the skin chashivas? It has to be the size of a bean. If it's Hashem, the way Hashem made it, a full beria, then it can even be less than. But if it's not the way Hashem made it, like it's a piece of flesh out of a larger animal, it has to be the size of a bean. End of that discussion. New topic, sort of. Boi Rav Oishia, Shnei Shoimrim Maushi Yitzdarfu. Do we combine together two shoimrim? Go to the next page. Now, what does it mean, two shoimrim? So I'll tell you outside, then we'll see it inside. The Gemara at first thinks it means, what if I have a food that has two shells? It's got the inner shell and the outer shell. Are they both shells in halacha? Are they both shoimrim in halacha? The problem is that's not true. The halacha is very clear that if there's two shells, the outer shell is insignificant because it's not really being shomer because it's already nishmar. You understand? If you have a food that there's the food and then a shell and then another shell, the outer shell is not a shell in halacha because even if I were to remove it, the food is still protected. So that can't be Rav Yishi's question. That's mefurish, as we'll see in a brisa. That's mefurish in a mishnah. Actually, it's a mishnah in Uksin that the outer shell is insignificant. So what is Rav Yishi's question? It says the Gemara, Heki Dami, what's the case? The case is where you have food, and then you have one shomer, and then there's another shomer on top of the first shomer. The problem is, that's not a shaila. There's no such thing as two shomer on top of each other. How do I know this? Rav Yehuda is describing onions, and he says, Shalosh klipis bebetzel. There are three layers of onions. There's panemius, there's the innermost peels, meaning the actual onion itself. The onion itself is food. It's not a shomer, it's not a yad, it's the food. And therefore, bein shlema, bein kedura mitzarefes. Whether the inside of the onion is whole, whether it's broken, it's mitzaref because it's food. So the inside of the onion is food. Then, emtsois, the middle peel, I guess there's some sort of middle shell that protects the inside of the onion. That is a shomer. Now, for it to be a shomer, it has to actually protect. A wall that's broken doesn't protect. So the middle shell, emtsois shleima mitzarefes. If the peel is fully intact and it's a shomer and it could serve as a shomer, then it's mitzaref. Kedura, but if it's broken, it ain't mitzarefes. If it's broken, then it's not mitzaref because if it's broken, it can't serve as a shomer anymore. Okay, that's the middle one. Inside is the food, one shomer. What about the outer shell, which is a shomer on top of a shomer? The outside is nothing. It's not metame at all. Why? Because it's not food and it's not a shomer. What do you mean it's not a shomer? It's a shell. The food's already protected. So you see there's no such thing as shomer al gavi shomer. So what is Rav Yishi's question? So says the Gemara, Rav Yishi shomer oichel shecholku kami baile. Rav Yishi is a very simple question. What if I have a food that's the requisite shear and then I split it in half? And now I have two shells. Do we say that each shell only protects the food it's protecting, which is less than the shear? Or you say, no, put all the shells together. In other words, I have the food is less than the shear and it's cut in half. Do I take the two shomrim and say, combine them for the shear? You say, no, each shell is only protecting the food it's protecting. In other words, if I have a bunch of peas that are in pods, do I combine each pod together to make the shear? You say, no, each pod is its own shomer, it's separate. That's his question. Do we combine shomrim together? There are situations we combine food together in a kli, whatever it is. The halach is that if they're on a kli and they're touching each other, they're mitzdarif. What about shells? Do we combine shells together? That's his fundamental question. So it says the Gemara speaks it out. Kivan to hailoi magen ahai v'hailoi magen ahailoi mitzaref. Do we say that each shomer is not protecting the rest of the food? How can we mitzaref together? Or each shell is doing its job, and therefore it could be mitzaref together. That's his shayla. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to quote all the things we just did and say, they're all mitzaref together, and aren't they shayrim? And then the Gemara is going to respond, no, they're all yads. That's what we're going to do. Tashema. Rav Elazar ben Azariah mitaher b'shel pul u'mitami b'shel kitnius b'nisharoitz mishmishon. Rav Elazar ben Azariah says that if you have a pod that has a single bean in it, we're assuming that pod is a shomer and it's mitzaref together. Now let me ask you a question. A single bean is not enough. What's the answer? It must be you have a vessel with multiple pods, with multiple beans together, and it's mitzaref together. Because he says if you have the pod and there's a single bean in there, it's the shomer, and it's mitzaref for the shear. The shear cannot be found in a single bean. What's the answer? There must be 10 beans here, 30 beans here, and 30 pods, and we're putting all the pods together. So you see them mitzaref together, and it's a case of a shomer. So the Gemara says, the answer is no. We're not talking about a shomer. Okay, we're trying to figure out whether shomers are mitzaref. The answer is we're not talking about shomers. The pod is not serving as a shomer, it's serving as a yad. Because again, certain things can go either way. A pod can go either way because it protects, and it also can be used as a vessel to eat. Same thing with bones. Bones can be a shomer or be a yad, depending on whether it has marrow. So the answer is we're not talking about a shomer, we're talking about a yad. Okay, let's keep going. Tashema, the Tana B'Rav Yishmael, Al Kol Zera Zerua Sheyizareya Kederesh B'nei Adam Moitzin L'Zriya Chida B'Klipasa Yisar B'Klipasa V'Adashim B'Klipasa. We just got finished saying that that's considered a shomer, a single lentil in its shell. A single lentil in its shell is not the requisite shear. What's the answer? It's mitzaref together. So you see that multiple shells and shomer could be mitzaref together. So the Gemara says, Kida'amar Avacha Breda Rava B'Kulcha Mishum Yad Hachanami B'Shedra U'Mishum Shomer. The answer is the case of the, let's say like corn, right? We said that the corn is mitzaref together, or like the lentils mitzaref together. The case is, I don't know the mitzias that well because I'm not very well versed in how they look. But I'm not a farmer, but we're talking about where it's not a single lentil, or it's not a single wheat, it's multiple wheat seeds, all protected by one shell. So it's not a single shell and a single wheat, because if that's the case, it's not the right shear, and then you'd have to be mitzaref together. The answer is we're not mitzaref shomer. So how can I have wheat and have the shomer be the requisite shear? The answer is, think of it as like a corn on the cob. It's not a single corn. It's a single corn, but a head of corn, but it's not a single corn, seed. It's multiple seeds in one shell. The Gemara says, that only works for the upper kernels, because apparently if you pull away the upper kernels, the whole thing falls apart. What about the lower kernels? The answer is they're in one row. Again, the mitzias, I heard a couple of shiurim on this. I don't really know what it looks like, but think of it like a sunflower seed. But apparently if you pull one row out, the whole thing falls. And that's why you need one shomer for all of it. Could you have a beya's amount of food in a single row of kernels? Meaning, how could you have, even if, let's say, it's a row of kernels of wheat, one row, how could that be a kebeya? The answer is, Bechiti de Shim ben Shetach. In the times of Shim ben Shetach, the heads of wheat were mamish so big, where one row of kernels can be an entire kebeya. The Gemara says, well, if you're going to go with the times of Shim ben Shetach, when everything was miraculously large, then we can answer the shayla. It doesn't have to be a row; it could be a single wheat seed and a kernel. And you'll say, well, how could that be the requisite size? The answer is because in the times of Shim ben Shetach, a single wheat kernel was the size of a kebeya, like an orange. Okay, new topic-ish. Gufa means we're going back. Going back, let's go forward. Gufa. Shnei atzameis v'alein shnei chatzayzeisim v'hichnes Hashem shnaim labayis v'abayis ma'alalein abayis tamei Yudah ben Akusai Mishum Rav Yaakov heich shnei atzameis mitzdarfim l'kazayis. Okay, we have this concept that you have the bone, and the bone can serve as a yad. Okay, I don't know why you need all this just to get into the discussion. What's the concept of a yad? The concept of yad is I pick up the bone and I could use this to eat the meat. So because it's like a handle of the meat, it's able to transmit tumah. This is only true with a bone to have a yad because I can actually pick up the bone to eat the flesh. But let's say there's a hair wrapped around the meat. Could the hair also be a yad? So I can't pick up a large piece of meat with one strand of hair. So says Rish Lakish, Neima loy have a yad. A hair, although it looks like a bone, right? It could be the same placement, right? The bone has the flesh on it. I could have a hair wrapped around the meat. But because I can't pick up the meat with the single strand of hair, it doesn't work as a yad. The yad, in other words, is not just something that conceptually can be used as a handle. It actually has to have functionality. Rav Yochanan disagrees. Afilu neimanami have a yad. Rav Yochanan says no, even a single strand. So Rashi explains because while on a large piece of meat I can't pick up a piece of meat with a strand of hair, but on a tiny piece of meat I could, and therefore Rav Yochanan feels that a strand of hair could be a yad. Okay, so what we're going to focus till the end of the daf is a single strand of hair. Could it serve functionally as a yad or not? If you have a piece of hide that has a kazayis basar, if you touch the meat, you tame. Or even if you touch the hair, tame. So you see that the hair is significant. What's the hair doing over there? It must be a yad. Meaning, there's only two choices. It's either yad or shomer. It says if I touch the hair, I'm tame. Must be a yad. So you see, a hair could be a yad. My la mishum yad. So the Gemara says loy mishum shomer. No, in that meat, the hair serves as a shomer. It protects the meat. So says the Gemara, mika shomer gabi shomer. Wait a minute. Flesh is the meat. Skin, hair. So you can't tell me that the hair is a shomer because then it's a shomer agabe shomer. We just got finished saying there's no such thing as a second layer of shomer. So the Gemara says apparently the way hair works is that it penetrates through the skin and it actually touches the flesh itself. So the hair could actually, the source of the hair is actually on the flesh itself, below the hide, and therefore the hair could actually be the shomer, and although it might stick up above the flesh, but because it goes through the flesh, it has the status of a shomer. Says the Gemara, Chalchuli mechalchol, the hair pierces the hide and reaches the meat underneath it, and therefore, because it reaches the meat underneath it, it could serve as a shomer. And the Gemara says, so wait, that means that every single time you have flesh, you have the meat, and then you have the hide, the hair actually goes through the hide. So how do you ever write a Sefer Torah? There are holes everywhere. If their hair follicles go through the hide, doesn't that mean that every Sefer Torah has holes? Says the Gemara, Maskar Rachaber Yaakov Elamiata Tefillin Hecha Kasvina. How do you write Tefillin? Habin and Ksiva Tam of Aleka. It's constant holes there. Holes possible a klaf. So the Gemara says, no, Ishtamitzi Hadam Marava. He forgot that which they said in Eretz Yisrael. Kol Nekev Shadiyai Oiver Alav Einer Nekev. Holes, if they're very small to the point where they don't catch the pen, they're not a problem. There are holes everywhere. It has to be that it's a large hole. Small holes that the pen can just glide over is not a problem. Or Iba Yisema, or, again, what was the point? Why are we talking about this? Because the machlokes whether a single strand could be a yad. Over here, the hair is a yad. So the Gemara says, no, the hair is a shomer and it goes through. The Gemara says, very simple. Taka is a yad. So I thought Rish Lakish said that hair is not a yad. The answer is this is a lot of hair. One hair is not a yad. This is multiple hairs. Yad means functionality. So it says Rish Lakish, if it's one hair, I can't pick up the meat with one hair. It's not a yad. If it's a bunch of hairs, like a bunch of the hairs of the animal, attached to a meat, where I could actually pick up the meat with the hairs, multiple strands, then it is Iba Yisema Kulam Shem Yad. And Kita Amar Rav Eloi, as Rav Eloi explained, B'mali Sheben Amalayim. It's bristles among bristles, meaning a lot of bristles together could be a yad. Hachanami Benima Sheben Anim. So to over here, multiple strands of hair could be a yad. Let's just finish up. Hecha itma de Rav Eloi. Where do Rav Eloi say the statement that multiple bristles could be a yad? Aha, Meloisha b'mleim mitamin u'mitameim mitzdarfim. Multiple bristles together are mitame. They're not mitzdarf because they're a yad, but they're yad because they're multiple bristles together. Meloi l'maychazi. What do you do with multiple bristles? Am Rav Eloi b'meloisha b'mleim. One bristle you can't pick up the corn with. Multiple bristles on top, like the top of the corn, it has like all that little hair. You could pick up the entire corn with all the bristles together. So one bristle is not. but multiple bristles together could. That's the first version. Let's just do two more lashinas, but it's the same thing. Lishna achrina amila. Some have a different version that hachanami mistam misham shomer. That when the brisa brought in the case of the hair, we originally thought yad. We went to shomer, then back to yad. This version is we just said, it makes sense that it has to be a shomer. Because if the hair is a yad, had to have a yad with one strand. You can't grasp it. So the Gemara says, no, really, it is a yad. And the answer is we're not talking about a single strand, we're talking about multiple strands. And multiple strands together could be a yad. Where did Rabbi Loi say this? One more version. One last version of this. The first version is they're arguing whether a single strand could be a yad. Rabbi Yochanan says yes, Rish Lakish says no, and then we got into the whole multiple strands, bristles. According to this version, they're arguing whether a single strand could be a shomer. These are all shomerim. Only a bone with marrow could be a shomer. A single strand of hair is not a shomer because although that single strand might protect the area that it's surrounding, that's nothing. It's not enough, and we don't combine it together. Rav Yochanan says no. Rav Yochanan says it could be a shomer. So according to this version, the machlokes is whether a single strand could be a shomer. Let's just finish up. Wait a minute. Hair is a shomer? I thought, isn't it flesh, hide, hair? So that means that the hair is a shomer al gabi shomer. Hair penetrates below the skin, so therefore it's actually flesh, hair, hide. If hair penetrates hide, that means there are holes in it. So how do we write a sefer Torah and tefillin? He forgot that if the pen flies over it, it's not a problem. And just to finish up, it's just the same flow. It's mamash the same rayas. Rav Yochanan says to Rish Lakish, or sheyesh alav kazayis basar negei b'tziv menu basar shekneg tamei. It says that if I touch hair, it's tamei. My lav mishum shomer. It must be a shomer. And you see that a single hair could be a shomer. Loi mishum yad. No, the case is the hair serves as a yad because you could pick up the food. How do I have one single strand of hair? How do I pick up food with that? It's going to break. And the answer is it's multiple hairs. And multiple hairs you can pick up meat with. And where did Rabbi Loi say this? The answer is multiple bristles can serve as a yad, even though one bristle cannot.
It's dropping in slowly.
Yeah.